Hi, boys and girls. This is Mr. Chalfant, and just like I told you, I want to read the end of the story to you, Naughty Little Pilgrim. So, if you remember today, when we left the story, John had found himself lost in the middle of the woods. Remember, he had left home because he wanted to have an adventure of his own and show how important and helpful he could be. He keeps getting himself into trouble, and his grandmother keeps rescuing him. Let's finish reading the story. He wanted to turn back, but he didn't know the way home. Each tree looked like every other tree. His bare feet had left no prints on the carpet of brown pine needles. He was lost. I think that's an interesting detail. He had bare feet. He didn't even have shoes on. John pushed through pine boughs or branches and at last saw a streak of sunlight. He hurried toward it and came upon a small meadow where green grass and flowers grew about a spring. Then he saw bushes of blueberries and bushes covered with ripe blackberries. He ran and drank from the spring and ate berries until his hands turned purple from their juice. He felt better and lay down to sleep under the trees. He wandered in the forest the second day, the third day, and the fourth. Near evening of the fifth day, John came upon a wide river. He knew the river was a long, long way from home. Maybe he was the first pilgrim to discover it. But that would do him no good if he never reached home to tell about it. He lay down on the grassy bank to rest and thought of his comfortable bed of straw in the loft at home. He was tired of berries for breakfast and dinner and supper. That's what they call lunch. Instead of saying breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they said breakfast, dinner, and supper. Would he ever find his way home? Right now, he would trade any adventure for a bowl of his grandmother's porridge. At daybreak, John was awakened by a hand on his arm. He opened his eyes and saw an Indian bending above him. 2 Indians. He looked into their painted faces and couldn't make a sound. Even if he cried out, there was no friend to hear him. One Indian lifted John and placed him in a canoe. The Indians paddled swiftly down the river. Where were they taking him? The canoe reached the mouth of the river and came out on the bay. John looked up and down the shore and saw nothing that he had ever seen before. He must have walked a very long way from home. John tried to tell the Indians where he belonged. He pointed toward the land and said, "Plymouth." The Indians kept on paddling through the blue salt water. What will become of me? John wondered. The Indians do not understand me. I don't understand the strange words they say to each other. The sun hung low over the bay when the Indians turned the canoe into a cove. They led John up a sandy beach to an Indian village and left him before a lodge built in the shelter of a dune. That's a sand hill, like a large hill made of sand. John's heart beat fast as Indian children ran and gathered about him. They stared silently. At last, one of the boys spoke to John. "Watch, ha ha hotch hotch." When John did not answer, the boy touched John's torn breeches. That means his pants. The young Indian's face was puzzled, as if he didn't understand why a boy would wear clothes on a warm summer day. John had to smile. Then the children smiled at him. An Indian woman came from the lodge and brought baked fish and cornmeal cakes on 2 large clamshells. John took the food eagerly. This was something he understood. The Indians were treating him as a friend. For several days, John played with the Indian children. He swam and ran races and learned to shoot arrows from their small bows. One morning, when they were hunting shells on the beach, John looked up to see the Pilgrims' shallop, that's their little boat, sailing into the cove. The Indian boys and girls ran when they saw the strange ship. John saw 5 Pilgrim men with Squanto in the shallop. He realized suddenly that he had run away from home. Now, boys and girls, he didn't mean to run away. He wasn't running away because he was angry. He was trying to have an adventure and come back and show everyone how important he was. He realized suddenly that he had run away from home and must have given these men a great deal of trouble trying to find him. He didn't like the stern looks upon their faces, like they were pretty upset. He ran and hid with the Indian children behind the lodges. Master Hopkins found John and took him by the collar, like they're not happy, and led him to the shallop, while Master Winslow and Squanto talked with the Indian men in the village. "It is well for you, John Billington, that your father is still in the woods hunting for you," Master Hopkins said. "If he were here now—" "Look," another of the Pilgrim men said, "a dozen Indian men are following Edward Winslow to our shallop. They carry bows and arrows as if they mean to come aboard with him." Uh-oh. "I fear this means trouble," Master Hopkins said. "Maybe they want to keep the boy. They did find him." Can you imagine? What if they say, "We're not going to give him up. If you lost him, he's staying with us." John might be in trouble, but I think he would want to go home. John watched the strong Indian men climb into the boat, and a queer or strange hollow feeling grew in his stomach. The Indians had been kind to him, but he did want to go home now. Then he saw that the shallop was moving out of the cove, and the Indian men were returning to Plymouth with the Pilgrims. Why? Was his adventure to cause trouble to all the Pilgrims? John decided that the best place for him was in the far tip of the bow, that's the front of the ship, where he sat quietly until he reached home and Grandmother Billington. As the shallop touched shore, many Pilgrims gathered to meet the boat. John saw his grandmother and Francis and Giles, and there was Little Dog. Even Governor Bradford was waiting. John climbed out of the boat and ran past the frowning Pilgrims to his grandmother. But he had stretched even her patience too far. Even she was not happy with what he had done. "I cannot save you from a trouncing this time," she said. "You worried us half to death and caused Governor Bradford no end of trouble. He had to send men to Chief Massasoit and ask help to find you. The chief sent runners to many tribes and finally brought back word where you were." John hung his head. Then he heard a murmuring among the Pilgrims. He looked up and saw the Indians gathered about Governor Bradford and Master Winslow and Squanto. They talked and pointed. The Indians seemed interested in the fields of tall green corn. Governor Bradford motioned the Indians to be seated upon the grass and asked the women to bring food for their guests. Then the governor walked directly through the crowd and stopped before John. John found it difficult to breathe. He said in a low voice, "I'm sorry." "Troublesome As the boy has been, Governor Bradford said, so all the people could hear, he has helped us. These are the Nauset Indians, whose corn we found on Cape Cod. Remember the corn they found back at the very beginning? This is the Indian group whose corn it belonged to, who were the owners of that corn. John's adventure led us to their village. Now we can pay the Indians with gifts. John was so surprised he could only look at the governor. He couldn't say anything. Then Master Bradford smiled at John. Francis and Giles looked at John respectfully. Little dog barked happily. Grandmother Billington put her hand proudly on his shoulder. Come, John, I have porridge cooked for you, she said. He ate until he was full, but more than his stomach was full. A new, very pleasant feeling filled him from head to toe. Did you see Master Bradford smile at me? He asked his grandmother. Aye, that means yes, she said, and smoothed his tumbled hair. Grandmother, he said, it feels good to be helpful instead of troublesome. She sighed. I hope you can remember that. I will, he promised. After this, he meant to try very hard. And boys and girls, that's the end of the story, except this part right here, which is a little bit of the record of the actual pilgrims who wrote down what happened. Let's read that part just for fun. This is what's called a primary source. It comes directly from the hands of the pilgrims who wrote it. The Billingtons came from the slums of London to join the Mayflower Company. That means they were not a very wealthy family. They were probably looking for a new opportunity to start a new life somewhere. Bradford, in his writings, says that the Billingtons were the most troublesome family among us, and I know not by what friends shuffled into our company. He tells how the two boys almost blew up the Mayflower while she was anchored in the harbor off the tip of Cape Cod, and that Francis, age 9, prowled in the woods behind Plymouth and discovered a lake, still called Billington Sea. Of John, age 7, Bradford wrote, one John Billington lost himself in ye woods, in the woods, and wandered up and down for some 5 days, living on berries and what he could find. At length, he lighted on an Indian plantation 20 miles south of this called Manamet. They conveyed him further off to Nauset amongst these Indians who had set upon ye English, that's us English, when we were exploring. But the governor caused him to be inquired for, or asked about, among the Indians, and at length Massasoit sent word where he was, and the governor sent a shallop for him and had him delivered. Those people, the Nauset Indians, came to Plymouth and made their peace, and we gave full satisfaction to those whose corn we had found and taken when we were at Cape Cod. Thus, peace and acquaintance were pretty well established with the natives about us. Boys and girls, I think that's a fascinating story, a true story about a little boy, a naughty little pilgrim, who just wanted to try to do something helpful. Anyway, that's a good story, and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye for now.